Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for the World Stem Cell Summit panel on the role of patient advocacy in advancing regenerative medicine. We have a wonderful panel of patient advocates here with us today to tell us their stories and share with us their insights. And I'll just start briefly by introducing myself. My name is Melissa King, and I am Executive Director of Americans for Cures. And I also was the head of field operations for California's Proposition 14, statewide ballot initiative that was on the November 2020 ballot and successfully passed to renew funding for our state stem cell research agency, the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. We were able to secure $5.5 billion. And I'll just say briefly that I, along with my colleague Jacqueline Hantgan, who's on this panel and you will hear from, worked on that campaign and are proud to say that it was really made possible by an amazing coalition of patients and patient advocates and patient advocacy organizations that were absolutely essential to us being able to secure that $5.5 billion. And with that, I'd like to have our panelists introduce themselves to you. And let's start with Adrienne Shapiro from Access Advocacy. Adrienne.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you. I'm Adrienne Shapiro. I'm fourth generation of mothers in my family to have a child born with sickle cell disease. And I did everything I could that as a person, knowing that I had trait, I was very careful in everything about that. And turned out that I had a false negative on my trait status, and that my daughter's father had come from Cuba and didn't know his status. So that was my introduction to advocacy and healthcare, was to, cheap test, cheap science is bad science. And so I've been waiting literally all my life for there to be a cure for sickle cell. With my daughter, we followed all of the science. We had norms treatment as a child. We looked into cord blood. We looked into bone marrow transplants. She was not a good candidate for any of that. And so that's how I found my way to stem cells. And when I did, it really opened my eyes to not just looking for answers for my family, but answers for other mothers like myself. And it's become my mission that my child and children like my child have access to regenerative care.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. And Jenifer Raub from Summit for Stem Cell, please tell us about you.
Oh, all right. Hi, thanks for having me here today. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's about 14 years ago. And I had a little trouble accepting that diagnosis and started searching for answers anywhere I could find them. Oddly enough, I was studying the work of Kurt Fried, and I ended up looking for a stem cell solution. Found Dr. Jean Loring's lab, went on to support that. We promoted it, we funded it, we even opened our own lab. We started a 501c3, and we ended up launching it into the private sector to expedite its journey to market and patient accessibility. The research is still continuing, and it's hopefully getting close to FDA approval. And that's it.
Thank you, Jenifer. And Sandy Barker from Gold Rush Cure Foundation.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. So my name is Sandy Barker. I am mom to 3 great kids, Christian, Garrett, and Kendall. My oldest son, Christian, was diagnosed with a very rare and aggressive form of leukemia the day after his 13th birthday. His battle was 20 months long. It included 2 bone marrow transplants, 3 relapses, tons of chemo and radiation, almost 17 months in the hospital. It was intense. Unfortunately, he passed away not just from complications from his aggressive treatment, but he died from liver failure from graft-versus-host disease. He was actually cancer-free when he died. What made this sting even more was he was denied FDA approval for mesenchymal stem cell therapy that's now being used and healing kids. Being in the hospital so long and seeing these children fight for their lives ignited something in me. They're being given decade-old therapies, and if they're survivors, they have long-term side effects. And if they're not, then they end up in the same shoes that my son did. And I just didn't sit well with me. So I made my first advocacy trip to Washington, D.C., just 2 or 3 months after he passed away. And I'm about to make my 30th trip. So I've learned a lot. It's been quite a journey, but I am also president and co-founder of Gold Rush Cure Foundation. We are in about 100 children's hospitals nationwide, and we support children battling cancer through our Pot of Gold gifting program and advocate for more effective, less toxic cures on a legislative level. And one of our focuses is supporting accelerated regulatory pathways for regenerative cellular therapies.
Thank you, Sandy. And my esteemed colleague, Jacqueline Hantgan from Americans for Cures and the California Prop 14 campaign.
Thank you so much. It's an honor and privilege to be here today amongst this extraordinary panel of advocates. I too find myself as an advocate nearly to the date next week. 20 years ago, my wonderful father, Henry, had an accident and a fall that left him with a C6-7 spinal cord injury. And as a result of his injury and the impact on all of our lives, I was able to work on the first campaign, Prop 71, in terms of the motivation. And I was just lucky enough to be living at the right place, a mile and a half or two from the headquarters of the proposition and the initial initiative, which became Prop 71. So I worked on that campaign, Americans for Cures, thereafter. And here we are today as another patient advocate for advancing medical research and stem cell regenerative medicine. So thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And let's start by talking about what actually works for advocacy. What do you advocate for in order to get heard and to move the needle on things like funding for research, for example? Sandy, let's start with you.
You want a good product. That sounds so cheesy, but a lot of senators, representatives don't want to support a disease-specific cause. It's called earmarking, and they really want a lot of bang for their buck. So what I love about regenerative therapy and stem cell research is it's so vast. There's so many diseases and conditions that it can treat and cure. And so it's a great thing to get these representatives and senators behind. They want to make their constituents happy. They want to get reelected. So when they're approving or really pushing to move forward these therapies, it's going to make their constituents happy. So I always tell people, the good thing about this and the exciting thing is that these representatives and senators, they're excited about it too. It's educating them and really, asking them to support it. And a lot of them will.
Great, thanks. And Adrienne, I'd love to go to you next on this. I know you also have a lot of experience in this area.
Well, along with Sandy, the legislation wants to have a place, they want to have a win. So when you go in, you need to be able to show them where their win is. But you also need to be able to express your journey. I've found that being able and being prepared to discuss, 4 generations of suffering. And also it helps if you understand the finances of healthcare. And I know I've even had one say to me, I don't want you to think I'm, heartless, but why should I care? And at first I was like, oh, okay. And I guess now here I am 5 years into this journey. And I know that's part of their responsibility is to understand. And so what we have to do is educate ourselves so that we are able to think about this thing that we're so passionate about in our families, intimately, but also in a broader context of society.
Jenifer, did you have something that you want to add to this?
Sure, I'd love to. I agree with Sandy that regenerative medicine holds the best promise to fully integrate the human nervous system and actually heal it. You know, we have surgeries now, we have medications, and they really don't get in there and address it directly. And I think that's the greatest promise it has. I've been on this journey for about 7 years, I think. It's a blur. It feels like a week ago. And what's interesting is that when I started, you know, Dr. Lauren's work was with induced pluripotent stem cells. Nobody knew what they were. Mm-hmm. You know, we started at a time and just simply educating the public. Doctors, forget it. I mean, they just said we're all crazy. But patients, you get their attention, they go to their doctors, and over time, the doctors would hear from enough patients to begin to say, what is this? And it's how we grew, just educating that way. And now we have a continuing medical education course that we offer for doctors that's fully accredited, and that's how we address it now.
Excellent. Jacqueline, I know that you are even currently working on some state legislation in California and have other experience in this area as well. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm listening to everyone, and I'm reminded of my youngest daughter. Famous line, that she didn't coin, but she said, "Go big or go home." And I'm thinking about advocacy and this panel here and how we found ourselves. Yeah. And I think that sums it up, is being bold and visionary, and knocking down on those doors and keep on knocking. Just in terms of the basic, you know, the basic answer to your question is what works. Because this stuff is hard, this grassroots efforts, and what I'm hearing from all of us, and we know, is it's an education, it's a re-education, it's a breaking down in the most simplistic terms of what we're even fighting for, and not giving up, and a path to doing that. And like Melissa said in our introduction, we simply could not have done this without patient advocates. Every single citizen of California who voted yes in some way, shape, or form became a patient advocate or an advocate when they voted yes. And we know that it's hard, and we know the path is long, and we know we're going to get doors closed on us, but we've made a lot of progress to date. And so, you know, it's just onwards.
Thank you. And that is the perfect segue into another thing I want to ask this group about. What have been the biggest challenges that you've faced as a patient advocate? And what are some of the most frustrating things you've heard while advocating? Adrienne, why don't we start with you?
Wow, frustrating. Well, I mean, for me, the idea of regenerative medicine was like living my sci-fi life, right? All my life, I had dreamed that there would be a cure. And for it to happen when it did, right? When CERM came out, and sickle cell, as I said, had gotten very, very little attention, right, since the 70s. And we were suffering, really, truly suffering, not so much the children, but the adults. And we could not get any traction anywhere, really, to have people pay real attention. And when regenerative medicine, when CERM said, we're going to give millions of dollars to cure sickle cell, it was just this like truly amazing thing against all our history, all our fears, all our feelings, and not even feelings, but experiences of not being enough for those sorts of things. So for me, it was just completely, you know, just a high, actually, to be able to talk about it, to be able to think about it, to share it. What was frustrating for me was this kind of, there were two things. One was the kind of resistance to thinking it's too complicated for the layman, right, the non-scientist to understand. So that was one of them. And the other was, because I was such a science geek and believed and had this was the thing coming, I did not truly understand in many ways the, how can I put it, the resistance that I would meet. Because of course, for me, this was the golden apple, right? And for many people, for lots of reasons, right? So I think those were the two things. And I guess there's a third one where everybody kept saying, well, but it's taking so long. And I'm thinking, oh my God, you know, my own family, you know, probably 5 generations of this, 125 years with nothing. How long did it take for us to get penicillin? And look at what we've done in the amount of time. So I think that for me was the most of the other, that I was not prepared for that. And I believe, you know, that now that we've got, you know, refunding and we can point to actual cures, that a lot of that is, you know, is behind us, the bulk of it. But I think going forward, we have to address the issue of access and healthcare in this country. Our concept of it, I think it's due for a complete redesign. And that really truly is being led again by stem cell research, because now we're not talking about just making somebody feel better, right? We're talking about actually stopping disease progression. We're actually talking about curing people. And so that concept is a total paradigm shift. So I'm eager I'm eager to address those sorts of things.
Thank you for that perspective. And Sandy, tell us about the challenges that you've experienced as a patient advocate and some of the frustrating things you've heard.
So my first trip was 13 years ago, and I was a green advocate going in, support childhood cancer, sign this childhood cancer caucus, like childhood cancer, everything. And I quickly realized, I'm generalizing, there are some that are wonderful representative senators that really did embrace it, but a lot of them didn't. They didn't want to earmark. Their next appointment after me was with, you know, all these different diseases and diabetes and breast cancer. And so if they give money here, they'll make these people happy, but tick off these other people. So it was early on that I realized, you know, that wasn't super fruitful, you know. And then it was also, it was on my heart, the regenerative therapies and stem cell, because of what happened with my son. So once I, you know, really started looking into it more and realizing, gosh, these kids, if they had access to this, we certainly don't need more chemo and radiation. If they had access to these therapies, their bodies could heal themselves. I mean, it would just, like CAR T therapy, you know, all these ones we've worked on that getting past that are now proven to be saving lives, you know. So the frustration, I guess, was, you know, when I started, kind of having doors shut in my face, right and left. And then afterwards, really kind of focusing on what they want to hear and what they will back. And, you know, doing that, things move along, you know, the needle gets moved, and, you know, but they want it. I'd say one other thing that was frustrating, we would work on something, get bills passed. It was bipartisan, it was bicameral. So everybody's happy, and it would get voted on unanimously in the House and Senate, but it would never get funded because there was no appropriations. That was always a real bummer too. So just, I always tell advocates that I'm training, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Just know, keep moving forward. It is a process. you know, go in and, you know, just do everything you can, but don't give up.
Yes. And that is one of the reasons that we in California, and Jacqueline and I were part of this campaign, as we mentioned earlier, as were many of you as volunteers. But that's why we believe it's so important to have done our funding the way we did, which is via a ballot initiative that allots this funding via bond sales in the state of California for the research, thereby protecting the funding over, which is absolutely essential for a field like regenerative medicine, when people need to start new careers in it, build those careers, and understand that there will be stable and predictable funding available, as long as they're doing great science, for them to apply for and access. But moving back over to the panel, Jenifer, I'd love to hear from you on challenges you've experienced as an advocate, especially since you are also a patient for the particular disease you're advocating for, and you're also a stem cell advocate, and also some of the frustrating things you've heard.
Boy, it's, where do you start? Frustration challenge. I'd love to see regenerative medicine therapies move faster through the FDA into approval. It's so hard to have people contact me and without hope. They're giving up. They've been retired for quite a while. They can't move. They can't take care of themselves. Medications are extremely expensive and not effective for very long. I mean, that's one side of it. Another is these bad actor clinics, the stem cell clinics that could potentially give a huge misunderstanding to regenerative medicine and give it a black eye. You know, there's some scary stuff that's going on out there with that. And, you know, the FDA needs funding in order to control that. Boy, it's just hard. The other that is information for Parkinson's for people with Parkinson's. It's scattered everywhere. Doctors have an average of 11 to 16 minutes per patient. It's impossible to get enough information to people in that short amount of time. So I always feel like I can't do enough fast enough to help as many people as I can.
And I can see from the nods that the panel echoes
everybody,
that.
Everybody
and thank you, Jenifer, for your work on that for patients like yourself.
Thank you.
Jacqueline.
Thank you. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, at least in the advocacy part, on behalf of 71 and Prop 14, which is super fresh in our minds, because there's so many conversations in terms of challenge where people would just say, oh, leave that to the federal government. The federal government takes care of that expense, as if only, you know, and I'm not here to say the federal government is not handling some of these, you know, but it's not enough. And that's the problem. But so the assumption is, well, somebody's taking care of it is always a bad assumption. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the NIH money comes from someplace, which is, you know, the federal government's, you know, obligation and responsibility. But there needs to be made aware that we need to increase our advocacy work and interest in these, sadly, the chronic disease and injuries, to mitigate them by making people aware that they need to call and follow up and put pressure, I guess, for lack of better words, on the federal government to fund the necessary labs and institutions that make breakthroughs in science and attempts to find cures and therapies. And so that's a huge challenge, long-winded, is we can't leave it up to somebody else or assume they're doing their job.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to add to Jacqueline's, we have to help them be able to do their job, right? So I was thinking like with the FDA, right? And you always hear of the FDA stopping this or not doing that or taking too long. And then when you really get to start working with them, you realize that that they really need our help to get funding in order to do this. And because they've been set up to do medicine and treatments and equipment and things like that in the way that it's always been done. And then we come to them with this total new paradigm, this total new thing of using a person's own tissue to heal them, to cure them. And, they have a learning curve. If my learning curve, just to be able to explain it, to support it, is so high, imagine what theirs is with the amount of responsibility that falls on their shoulders. And so with that, I'm saying there needs to be funding for them. There needs to be continued more funding for NIH because again, we have to get people up to speed. We've got to get them changing processes. And we don't want this. I think my greatest fear was we will drop the ball, right? And not fund it. And other countries will pick up on the things that we've learned and we've started, right? And will benefit from what we're doing. So I think that we have to, it is a partnership, and that we who are looking forward to these cures have to be aware that it's all of us together working towards this and how we are interdependent.
Absolutely. And thank you for that perspective. And yet another thing for all of us to advocate for, which is actually more funding for the FDA, because they have a lot more to deal with now that this whole incredible field of regenerative medicine has evolved to the point where we have clinical trials, and in some cases late stage clinical trials, which is exciting. And they need the staff and the funding to be able to process it. Totally agree. All right, so I'd like to ask each of you to tell the audience what message is most important to you as a patient advocate, given all your experience. And Jenifer, I'm going to start with you.
That surprised me. Boo. What message? I talk to people all day, and my message that I like the best is just don't give up. Stay positive and see. Forums like this are hard on me. It makes me look at my disease, and it's not a real pretty thing to look at if you are honest with yourself. I kind of tend to hide from it and just keep going forward. I wake up, I'm in pain, like so many people are with Parkinson's. You're hanging onto the furniture. You got to get your legs going underneath you. And a couple hours into the day, you can start moving and getting things done. And it's just, you just don't give up. And going back to the funding issue, I think funding, it just needs to be massaged into the FDA. I think it needs to become a priority rather than set aside. It's like, it's, Parkinson's, it's older people and generally. And anyway, it's kind of sad. And I'm not saying the FDA looks at it that way. I've gotten to know Dr. Peter Marks quite well lately, and he's a very kind and compassionate man. And I feel he really does care, but his hands are tied.
Yeah. Yep. He's a great champion for the research and the technology and making it available.
And the process.
Absolutely. Sandy, would love to hear from you what you think about this.
I would say keep it simple. When you're going to these offices, if you're doing Hill visits or, things like that, and going to DC, if you're, actually, it doesn't matter whether you're doing DC or anywhere else. If you're emailing them, keep it simple. What they want to know is about what you're wanting to get past. So share your experience and your story. Why is this important to you? This is Advocacy 101 I'm giving you. Okay. Why is this important to you? Share your story. Second one, What are you asking them to do and why? This is the regenerative therapy. It is faceted. It can help so many people, blah, 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 blah. Then they want to know, is it bipartisan or bicameral? That's important. And how much does it cost? That in a nutshell is what you need to tell them. We always go on off all these little tangents, but really that is the meat and potatoes of what they need to know to make their decision. So I would say my 2 cents, whether you're emailing them or going to their, to meet them in person or whatever, whoever you want to back this, keep it simple and stick to the facts in addition to your story.
Thank you. And Jacqueline, how about for you? What's the most important message for you as a patient advocate?
Yeah, thank you. I tend to agree with what everyone else just commented on, and particularly Sandy in terms of keeping the message, short, specific, and to the point. The redundancy in this case, I think, gets us further.
Which Jacqueline is very good at, by the way.
Right. Persistence, and it is persistence. Yeah. Because, some people get it right away, and it's not to someone's credit or disadvantage if they're not there. We have to meet people where they're at, and then understand, not just by intuition, where they're at. And if it's not in their, kind of sphere, we just have to break it down and let the urgency is always there. Come to it with that, but then with, specific sort of asks. Everyone, for better or worse, doesn't, share our stories. So it doesn't hit them necessarily the same way, but that doesn't mean we can't help turn people into great patient advocates and work tirelessly on behalf of or for, this issue. And that has become, my experience, I think our experience together. We're building, incredible coalitions, not once, but twice, at least in the state of California. People are happy to get on board. They just need to be asked to do so. Yep.
And potentially given the right tools, which we will try to do at the end of this session as well. Adrienne, how about for you? What's the most important message to you as a patient advocate?
Well, I think really for me, again, all of this that we've talked about, I mean, you've got people on here that I've learned from, still learning from. But I think for me, aside from what we've already said, was there were a couple of things I did have to learn as an introvert that you can't be an introvert and be an advocate. You have to show up. You have to speak out. You have to stand up, and you have to be truthful. Right. And then I think cultivating the ability to listen to the person that you are speaking with, so that you can not only talk to them on their level, but understand what's important to them and have that ability to have them see how what we're trying to do is important to them. Because all of us, whether it's a rare disease, whether it's an unfortunate thing that happens to a young person, or whether it's just growing older, will come up against health problems that regenerative medicine and stem cell research is trying to address. And so I think that having that ability and to help someone that you're speaking with be able to relate to their own lives, and then therefore leading to the value of it. And I really think that for me, that's been part of my experience coming from the community I come from, where we're always trying to make people think we're valuable. We're trying to get, that we matter, or we are not less than, right? And getting other people who are in power to value what we're saying and not only think in terms of us benefiting, but also how they themselves benefit.
Absolutely. And again, a great segue into something else I'd love to talk about with this group, something that is near and dear to each of us in various ways. Let's talk about access and how do we best advocate for the necessity of access to treatments, which actually, as we'll hear from the panel, often goes beyond mere access to those treatments, to other surrounding issues in the healthcare arena. And Adrienne, I'd love to start with you.
Well, I think access is everything. Having access, again, 125 years, we've known about sickle cell. We just get our new treatments, really 3 years ago. The fight that we were not prepared for, right, for coverage so that we could have these new drugs, the fight for docs to understand what the new treatments do and that how improving our lives, what that means to us. And then it was sort of the realization that we didn't even have access to quality healthcare. So here I'm having a discussion about access to a new treatment when you're getting subpar healthcare. And if you're getting subpar healthcare, how are you going to really benefit from the new treatments, let alone when you get to the point where maybe the cure is available, that you are going to be healthy enough for that cure. And that's physically, mentally, spiritually. It's, again, I keep talking about this paradigm shift that I see stem cell research leading when it comes to research and what we think of as medicine, and now what it is we think of as healthcare, and moving it from being transactional, right? You broke your leg, we're going to fix it, we're going to do this, to where we're really looking at the person and saying, what can we do to keep our citizens, our people in optimal health wherever they are, right? And what does that give the society overall? I think because we've never been able to think about it. I mean, we really haven't been able to think about it. I have in my sci-fi world, but I mean, most of us, the idea that people could really be cured, right? So if they can be cured, right, then how do we keep them? What do we do for them with what we can do now so that they're in the best state of health that they can be in?
Absolutely. Jacqueline, would love to hear your perspective on this, especially knowing that you and I, again, were part of the Prop 14 campaign, and written right into that initiative were some specific directives around one aspect of access, but would love just your overall thoughts on this subject area.
Yeah, no, thank you. And that's what I was going to actually just read some of the establishment that Bob Klein, the author of the initiative, and wrote in key functions to include this go around in Prop 14, which we successfully passed in November, to enhance access to clinical trials, including reimbursement programs for patient qualified costs to help achieve the objective that reimbursement covers patient expenses, so on and so forth. I mean, there's this very specific language to examine, develop, and assist with implementation of financial models to enhance the accessibility and affordability of treatments and cures arising from institute-funded research for Californians. Key functions and language that was incorporated, so we understand, voters understand, that this is crucial and the time is overdue, but the time is now. And we can't turn our backs towards this issue.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, at least to the voters of California, for voting yes and saying this is essential.
Yep. And we have the board and the staff at CIRM working hard to implement those new aspects of Prop 14, what they brought to CIRM, and they are necessary now, again, thankfully, because this field has evolved from when we first started back in 2004. CIRM opened its doors in 2005. This was still a pretty new field, regenerative medicine and stem cell research. But again, we are in a stage now where we have phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials happening for single treatment cures, as many of you have pointed out. And so now we need to make sure that access is provided to people from all communities in California, regardless of their socioeconomic resources or their geographical location. And, you know, the majority of the clinical trials are going to take place in the academic medical centers that are largely clustered on the coast of California, but not everybody lives there. And not everybody can afford to come there. And so that's what Jacqueline is talking about, that we had written right into Prop 14. Yeah. Sandy, I'd love to go to you on this. I know you have yet another perspective on access that I think would be very helpful for everybody to hear.
You know, these incredible therapies, once the safety and efficacy has been proven, they're only helpful if patients have access to them. That's why I have so much respect for people like Dr. Randy Mills when everything he did at CIRM with his accessibility. You know, the clock's ticking. Whether you have an acute situation like my son Christian had, and you don't have much time, or you have a chronic situation where your condition is deteriorating, the clock is ticking. It's urgent. I mean, you know, this has to move forward. We need to make this a priority, because all of these incredible therapies that are coming about, you know, if patients don't have access to them, well, then really, you know, what do you do? You know, there's a term that is used all the time, and thinking about it, I can feel it. They lost their battle. Mm-hmm. They failed treatment. That term makes me do this because it was used. I'm sorry. It was used after Christian died. And it always made me so upset because he didn't fail treatment. He did literally everything that was asked of him, as do all of these other patients we're advocating for. They're doing their part. They're taking everything that's, you know, thrown at him to get better. They're not failing treatment. The treatment's failing them. It's time to make this a priority and give them access to the treatments that will turn this around. It just is. We have to do everything we can to make it, to educate all of the people who do make these decisions. We need to educate them and just say, it's time. We don't have the luxury of dragging this on and on. We need to make it a priority.
You for sharing that, and we all share your feelings on that, although I can't say that I could share them as deeply as you, having lost a son, primarily because the treatment wasn't provided to him in time, even though it existed. And maybe you could just go into a little bit more detail about that. I think that might be helpful for people in understanding what we mean in this case by this sense of urgency for access.
So there was a mesenchymal stem cell. Actually, it was when Dr. Randy Mills was CEO of Osiris. And there was a therapy called Prochymal, which were mesenchymal stem cells. And it was literally used for graft versus host disease. Christian was in the latest stage of that, hemorrhaging 4 liters of blood a day. And it was it was horrible. And I mean, he tried to help get it approved, everything like that. And I know I have to say, I know the FDA has improved as far as compassionate use approvals and that kind of thing. It just wasn't granted to Christian until it was too late. And that was okay. Just that in and of itself, I'm a mother in a hospital room, knowing there's a treatment that could help my son, but not being given approval for it. I mean, talk about helpless. It's a horrible feeling. And I'm just one mom of every person out there who needs access to whatever therapy will help them. It's hard. It's hard. And so that's why I'm so passionate about doing what we can to, you know, get this regulatory process expedited.
And we are all thankful that you are out there advocating. So thank you. Jenifer, would also love to hear from you about access and thoughts that you have from your experience.
Mm-hmm. learning about all this is quite an adventure for all of us, I'm sure. And the frustrations and the walls you hit. And one of the things that I discovered is a lot of pharmaceutical, and this has nothing to do with regenerative medicine, but pharmaceutical trials, what is it? Almost, what is it, 60% of them fail?
Higher than that.
Yeah, because people just fail to show up. They can't get to the appointments for the follow-ups. Summit for Stem Cell is, we're starting a patient financial assistance program that we're just about to launch to address the socioeconomic issues. You know, people shouldn't be denied help because they can't afford to get there, can't afford the travel expenses, and so we're raising funds and working hard at that one too, to make sure that people from all over the country can get the help.
Thank you. And you've all touched on it a little bit already, but I'd love for us to just spend a few minutes talking about urgency and how you get across the urgency for patients who do not have time to wait for politics or a good business environment. I'll start with you, Jenifer.
Uh-oh. Got me again. Urgency, boy, nobody feels it more than a patient like myself. You know, you feel your body slipping. You're like, oh gosh, it's happening, and the realization that is just it's not real comfortable. And it's that way for so many different conditions and diseases that deal with all of this fun stuff. Urgency, the clock is our enemy. I don't know how else to say that. Every day that goes by, it's our enemy. How do you get access? That's the $1 million question. I mean, really, if I had the answer, all of us wouldn't have this conversation right now.
Right, exactly. Sandy, I know you've already talked about it a little bit too, but any other thoughts from you on urgency and how we can best get that across to those who need to hear it from us?
No, and I was just going to say, Jenifer, no one feels it more than the patient or the parent of a child. Absolutely. Because you feel so helpless. And it is tough. I remember when I used to do my health visits and I'd go into an office and I'd meet this young health legislative aide, and I would tell them, you know, I'm not here for Christian. My son's gone. I'm here for your children. I'm here for my grandchildren. We want the next generation, not even the next generation, the people who are coming up to have access to this before they even need it. It's got to happen now. We don't want this delay. And it's just, like I said, educating them on the urgency. Is it helpful? Not always, but it is important to really let them share your story and let them see this can't wait. This can't wait. People are dying, and you know the conditions are deteriorating, and this has to happen now.
Jacqueline, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, gosh, I'm thinking about that same daughter, and a week and a half ago, she watched Crib Camp, which is a disability revolutionary Netflix documentary put out in 2020. And then I'm thinking about that we're nearly at this July will be 31 years of the passage of the ADA. So on the one hand, it's the urgency, and the other hand, recognizing that these things take time. And clock, you said, Jenifer, you know, is our enemy, and that is true. But then I'm thinking of my father and thinking about, you know, he was injured nearly 20 years ago, but just only nearly 30 years ago, you know, he wouldn't have access necessarily to a bus, a curb cut. I mean, I'm you know, have these chilling sensations now when I think about, like, in New York, we're New Yorkers, when a bus driver said to me, no, you'll just take the next bus. I said, and this was like 5 or 6 years ago. And I said, okay, hold on one just quick moment. I just got to get the number of your, you know, this bus right now in time. And he was like, okay, wait. And then he lowered the ramp and took the time. you know. So on the one hand, we've come a long way. On the other hand, it's never enough. But thank God we live in, ADA passed, again, only 30 years ago. And then Nomi's watching this, documentary, which is really worthwhile to watch, but just the incredible pain and suffering of inability to do things that now at least are mandatory laws in this country by way of
and another incredible example of advocacy. Adrienne.
It's the duality that I live with every day, right? I live in this world where I know I have seen mothers who have literally prayed over their kids, right? And because they had no immune system and they've gone through treatment. And I've seen those kids, running around. This one in particular, she was running it around and she was just the cutest little thing. And we were, of course, all the moms are like, oh. And then she bent down and she touched the floor. Well, so all of us moms who knew that she had been, was a bubble baby, our hearts all stopped. And, we almost jumped up together to pick her up. And then we all kind of realized, no, she could do that. She could touch that floor. And it was just glorious. It was glorious to know. I could read articles where there are people with sickle cell who've gone through trials and are cured and are running and doing all those things that I know are possible. But in my own case with my daughter, she got bad treatments. And so as she has those things, her state of the disease is complicated. And we did get an offer to try. And I was just floating. I could not get home fast enough. And I said to her, we can do this. You can lead this. And she looked at me and she said, but Mom, I am not cure worthy. And I looked at her and, first you think when somebody uses a term like that, they mean like, I'm not important enough. But what she said to me was this: I have too many antibodies. They've given me a bad blood transfusion. I have damage here. I have damage there. And I'm looking at her and I'm hearing what she's saying. And I am like admiring her. And on the other hand, feeling completely and totally despondent because I wasn't able to prevent those things happening to her. I wasn't able to stop them giving her the wrong transfusion. I wasn't able to, in many ways, get them to give her consistent care. And she got some of the best care in the nation. It is so, it really is like, I don't know, this duality where now when I am burying people that I've advocated for and I'm feeling their loss and I'm crying from that loss, is not so much that they're gone because, they've suffered and nobody wants them to suffer anymore and their bodies are done. But it is, for me, how many years of the years they've had on this planet, those years of life that they suffered needlessly because they didn't have access to good care. They didn't have consistency. They didn't have a person who would say, I'm going to follow the expert, right? And I'm going to do that because that's the expert and that's the right thing to do. The person looked at them and said, made a judgment about whether or not they really were in pain or they really needed this or they really needed that. And when you think about that, how many more are suffering for those reasons? That urgent, it becomes even more urgent. It becomes urgent that we get this, that we have access to it. It becomes urgent that people know, right, what we have already in place in America as far as what we could be doing for people, and that we're not doing it, and those reasons we're not doing it. And as part of this shift in going from making judgments not out of what is truly best for the person, right? That we start changing that. And we have to do that, because to keep going on the way we're going, I believe it's just hard on our souls. It's hard on our collective souls. So I think access and quality care and awareness, right? I think those are the things.
Thank you. All right, we are nearing the end of our time together. So I would like to ask each of you to share briefly, what is your call to action for the audience today? And Sandy, I'm going to start with you.
I would say keep abreast of what initiatives are coming up, what policy, what legislation is coming up. I would love to see, Bernie, this is a shout out. If regenerative medicine website would have some kind of a resource to direct patients, so people could go somewhere and go, oh, this is what's going on. And then email your representative and senator, let your voice be heard. Why is it important to you? This is what I'm wanting you to consider, and then ask. I would love for you to, co-sponsor, whatever you want them to do. But definitely, let your voice be heard, because there really is power in numbers, and it's effective. So that'd be great.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Yeah, well, thank you. That sounds really good, Sandy. And to Bernie, thank you for hosting us and putting this on annually, but knowing the importance of advocacy amongst the science and investigators and actively. And so to that point, Sandy, is finding out, what's happening locally in your own towns or cities and states to help advance, and those letters work, and those little phone calls to the senators or your local congresspeople do help. There's that power in numbers. So for example, in California right now, we're helping to get the message out about SB 247, which is the RDAC, the Rare Disease Legislative Action Committee. And so we are trying to help them establish a council. And we've made it, we're past appropriation in the Senate appropriations, but it's been a collective voice and a coalition of participating in phone calls and writing the letters and sending in our names to say we support this and we want it to happen. And that would, in this case, would be to establish an advisory council, which is crucial.
Absolutely, and it will soon be going through the California State Assembly, is with the Assembly, and Adrienne's a big part of that as well. So Adrienne, let's go to you. Call to action.
Call to action. I think my call to action is, along with everything else, I really think it, to me, to this audience that we're talking to our researchers and our manufacturing arm, because all of that is that pipeline, right, for this work and getting this work to a point where it is actually at the bedside. I would like for there to be outreach, right, from the researchers, the manufacturers, to us advocates, because I think together we have a thundering voice, and together we're going to make it happen. And together we can help to accelerate this, because we've already proved that it can be done. What we have to do is put in that infrastructure, and that's physically, that's financially, that's culturally, of what this world and what this science and research has to offer us as humans.
Right. And Jenifer, your call to action for our audience today.
Call to action. Jump up here and let's see you guys talking. No, I'm kidding. Everybody here stated it so eloquently. The only thing I can say is I'm honored to be on this panel with all of you. I admire all of you for what you do, what you're doing, and what you've done. It's just, it's amazing what voices can do. So anyway, we'll call to action. Be a voice, be heard.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jenifer.
Can I share my little cheese ball quote?
Yes, please do.
Yes.
Catherine Pulsifer, you can adopt the attitude, there's nothing you can do, or you can see the challenge as your call to action. And that goes out for everyone. And for my fellow panelists and everybody else, there's a quote that says, the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are often the ones who do. So it's an honor being on this panel with you guys.
For anybody in the audience who is interested in being an advocate, getting started, who needs help from patient advocates or patient advocacy organizations, or just wants to learn more about advocacy, you can contact the Regenerative Medicine Foundation that puts on this wonderful World Stem Cell Summit every year. And Bernie and his team can provide you with what you need or connect you with one of their numerous partner organizations, including ours, those of us on this panel, that can get you what you need. Or you can come to those of us on this panel. You can find our names and bios and our organizations on the website for the summit, and we'd love to hear from you. And we need more advocates all the time. So thank you all. And if anyone has anything to add to that, jump in. Otherwise, we can sign off.
Just want to say thank you.
Honored to be here. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you all, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
You too.